we had Sabrina Singh calling this, the spokesperson for the Pentagon, a strategic withdrawal. And the Western mainstream media has equally been wanting to call this and has been keen on calling this not a defeat at all and not significant.
No.
So, okay, Andre, well, let's begin with you. What is the reality here? What happened in Avdiivka? Why is it important? Let's begin with you, Andre.
I mean, it's important insofar as the shelling of Donetsk, obviously, and the fact of Avdiivka being the most fortified area along the whole front line, which is 1,200 kilometers at least long. And that is a very important thing. In terms of Kiev regime propaganda, it's kind of a repetition, although on somewhat higher level of Bakhmut / Artyomovsk, if you wish. And in this particular case, obviously, they try to lower numbers, but as Shoigu reported to Mr. Putin, just through 17th and 18th of February, there was more than 2,400 casualties. The number, very large number, we don't know, people say many hundreds of POWs, and it's obviously hasn't been strategic withdrawal. It was basically a run. It was a rout. And why it was a rout, it's a separate topic, of course, because obviously when you begin to be, how to put it politely, get acquainted with something like Fab 1500, forget about Fab 500, we're looking at Fab 1500. There is no much, good, any kind of the, reinforcement will do to you, because essentially you're going to be shell-shocked one way or another. And they tried to do the Mariupol Azovstal 2.0 in the coke plant. It's didn't work out for them either. And the question is that it's not only just the fact of Avdiivka, it's the fact that Krinky, this bridgehead, which was essentially nothing more than a propaganda PR action, which cost now in excess of 2,000 KIAs on the for Ukrainian forces. It is completely now under Russian control. There is nobody left on the left bank, with the exception, of course, corpses. Sorry to say this, it sounds horrible, but that's what it is. It was a killing field. So Krinky is also back. And then once you have this situation, you basically broke through what was the anchor, essentially, of the whole defense of the southern axis. And from there, what you probably will see first, they never prepared any kind of the real lines to fall back. So they just basically digging as they run away, and they try to hold on to some kind of the defensive line, which they try to construct. But it makes no difference now, and eventually it will go to the what essentially have been predicted for in the last half a year at least. They will go into, once the defense collapsed, which it did in Avdiivka, they will go into what is called Achegovy, which means actually sporadic, spot-oriented defense. It's sort of like Festungs, Hitler Festungs during Operation Bagration. So it's on a smaller scale, of course, but that's the only thing which is left for them. And they have to now move even more actively, whatever the reserves they have along this whole front line. And yeah, that's pretty much destabilizes the whole front for them. And Russia continues to do what they do, just rolling, steamrolling. That's important.
Scott, jump in on the significance of Avdiivka. What happened? Why did it turn out this way? And what I wanted to show you first, Scott, actually, for you to react to, because maybe both of you can also comment on what's next here. So CNN had this Ukraine's defeat at Avdiivka darkens the mood in the West. And it took a while for Mr. Nick Patton Walsh to actually get to the topic of Avdiivka, talked about Munich, talked about Navalny, which we will talk about later today. But then he finally talks about how it's not such a big deal. He goes into this map, look at the map, but then he says Kiev is now dealing with Russian surges on many fronts. After Avdiivka, they may attempt to sweep up surrounding villages. The fall of this railway hubs frees up Kremlin units and air power to fight elsewhere. Vugledar to the south, Robotin in
Yeah.
another southern village. So, Scott, what is next in your opinion? And maybe you could also comment on the Avdiivka situation, how it all connects.
Well, I think Andre covered the the importance of Avdiivka quite well. It was fortified. It's been a thorn in the side of the Donetsk People's Republic since 2014. On and off fighting throughout the 8 years of conflict before the special military operation, and the scene of nonstop fighting ever since. The prioritization in terms of troops. The Russians. I think that there's something. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Andre. The First Army Corps, which is a Donetsk People's Republic unit, although now it belongs to Russia. They were the ones leading the charge for a long time here, and they basically burned themselves out. They lost the ability to continue the offensive, and so sometime in, I think, late 22, early 23, and then other priorities took over, defeating the Ukrainian counteroffensive in Robotino, etc. But it's a symbolic thing and a strategic thing. I mean, there's some road networks, rail hubs, things of that nature. Logistics always drives war. So by taking this, it would be symbolic. You're getting rid of one of the anchors, the cornerstones of Ukrainian defense, and you're improving your own logistical sustainability. You're getting rid of a heavily fortified zone. But all that discussion makes it sound like this was a one of, meaning this was the Battle of Avdiivka, and then it's over, and now we're going to redefine the war elsewhere based upon that. No, let's talk about what happened at Avdiivka, and I think this is important. And again, Andre, anytime I get it wrong, just jump in, because
you're perfect.
my goal is not to get anything wrong here, but this is first of all, let's talk. The way the war had gone on before is that both sides had artillery, lots of artillery. This has been an artillery-driven war for some time now, and the Ukrainians actually, when the West provided them with specific systems like the M777 or the Caesar or the Paladin, etc. These are 155 millimeter, but now, Andre, these are the 52 caliber, correct, as opposed to the 38, which means they have a little bit longer range.
Compared to Star S, yes, slightly longer.
And so what would happen is the Ukraine, first of all, the day of massed artillery disappeared early on in this conflict. Back when I was in artillery, we'd bring up a battery, throw open a lazy W, and just do a battery 6, and throw rounds down range and saturate an area, and we were happy. But then drones happened, and you'd set up your lazy W, and a drone would come in and go pop, 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 and you lost 3 guns, and you're like, I haven't even started this thing. And then you start firing, then the counter battery comes in, you lose 3 more, and now your battery is gone. And so they had to break it up into 1 and 2 gun platoons that are operating. The Russians had to work on command and control. They had some communications problems in terms of responsiveness, because now you didn't just have a battery there. You broke it up into platoons. You need to replicate communications capability. There were problems, straight up problems. The Russians had artillery numbers, but in terms of effectiveness of fire, on some occasions, the Ukrainians were actually able to do a better job in counter battery warfare and better job in concentrating fires to break up Russian attacks. And so the battle, it became very much a positional war. The Russians would launch attacks, take a position, but then the Ukrainians would bring in artillery, knock the crap out of the Russians, counterattack with with an effective force and seize it back. And then the Russians would regroup, and you're going back and forth, back and forth. There's not too much major change on the battlefield. Drones are introduced on both sides, very effective. And then what started tipping it for the Russians was when they took out the air defense of the Ukrainians. And now the Russians were able to come in with this weapon system. Andre spoke about it was a Fab 500 early on, just basically a 1,000 pound. Well, it was a Fab 250 actually early on. It was a 500-pound bomb, and they put on this cheap attack. It's sort of like what the United States did with the JDAM. You take a Mark 82, Mark 84, and you put you put on some fins, and then you put on this GPS satellite nose. You drop it, and it guides in and hits the bomb, hits the target. The Russians did something similar. They put on these wings that fold out, and they started, as the air defense got taken down, they could start, the Russian Air Force start coming in closer to the battlefield, not coming into the battlefield because air defense still reached out, but drop these bombs outside of the envelope of Ukrainian air defense. And the Ukrainians didn't have a response for these. These would come in and they start hitting targets. And then as they suppress the air defense more and these bombs get bigger in size, Fab 500, Fab 1000, Fab 1500, that's a 3,000-pound bomb. And they're just coming in and they're popping things off. And now with no air defense, the helicopters are able to come in and move in. And now the Russians are getting dominance, but the Ukrainians still have this artillery that is good. The Ukrainians were really good at artillery, really good. They ran out of ammunition. And this changed everything because now the Ukrainians literally couldn't stop. Now the Russians can do things like, in addition to bringing in their bombs and taking out air defense, they can start to mass their fires. They can stop using 1 and 2 gun platoons and start bringing the artillery in and saturation attacks without fear of effective counter battery. The Ukrainians responded by shifting over to drones. They were trying to flood the zone with drones. And initially they had some success. I mean, my God, anybody who looks on Telegram, anytime you see an FPV drone, it's, all she wrote for the person that's going after was a Russia and Ukraine. Rarely somebody ducks and it misses. But when an FPV locks onto you, a letter's going home to your mom. Generally speaking, I have to say, I was just in the new territories, and the biggest fear we had, the Russian Ministry of Defense said, we don't want you going there. And I said, but I need to go there. They said, all right, but there's certain zones where you are literally, hey, diddle, diddle, keep going. Do not stop because you're getting into the envelope of the FPV drone. And there is nothing we can do for you if it locks onto you. You're going to die. And fortunately, as we entered that zone, the weather was utter crap. I mean, we're talking wind, rain, and we're like, yeah, because little FPV drones can't fly in that weather. So we got the hell out of Dodge. And they're a problem. But the Russians aren't stupid. What the Russians did is said, okay, how are they doing this? They found out how they communicate. Not only would they jam them, but they would isolate this, and they'd stop dropping those fabs, and they drop their own drones. And the most dangerous job right now in the Ukrainian military is drone operator. The second you tune in, boom, you're dead. And so they took the drones out. And what I'm trying to get at is the Ukrainians have nothing. And so this gives the Russians the ability to dominate the battlefield, to dictate the tempo of the battlefield. They get to attack where they want to attack, how they want to attack, when they want to attack. Now, when the Ukrainians want to counterattack, the problem is they bring their forces together. They're getting detected. There's no air defense, and they're getting slaughtered before they even come to the front line. And when they do come to the front line, and this is another part of the game changer, they have certain units that are well known. I mean, the 47th Brigade with the Bradleys, the 82nd with the Leopards and maybe the Challengers, and then the 3rd Assault Brigade, the former Azov,
which is pretty much gone.
Yeah, but the thing about the 3rd Assault is, they're supposed to be the elite thing. It turned out that 2 of their battalions aren't Azov at all because to reconstitute, the Ukrainians have taken so many casualties that to reconstitute the elite counterattacking force, they had to go to the territorial units, grab them out, put them in with no training, no coordination, everything. So it's no longer elite, it's bodies. and they get in there and they're not trained, they don't coordinate, and they got slaughtered. So the Ukrainians don't even have effective counterattack. The reason why they pulled out of Krimki, I'm told, is that some of the few units they have left that are relatively intact and capable are these Marine brigades that were committing suicide there, and they pulled out so they could get some of their battalions put in to have a counterattack force, because they got nothing. And the reason why I bring all this up is that's how the Russians won Avdiivka. I'm sure I just butchered that. Avdiivka. Yeah.
Avdiivka.
I've been saying it wrong all along. But this is happening everywhere. It's the same template now that's going to happen time after time after. It's happening in Robotyno right now. The Russians are attacking. The same thing that I just described is happening there. It's happening up in Kupiansk. It's happening wherever the Russians engage. And here's the thing. While the Ukrainians don't have any reserves anymore, the Russians, on the other hand, have built these giant operational groups now that they're bringing in. 40,000 guys coming up at 40 to 60, I guess, in Robotyno. Up in Kupiansk, they put in another 40, but they're going to also redivert the two combined arms armies that they brought in for Avdiivka now are freed up, and they didn't suffer hardly any casualties. That's the other thing. You know, the Ukrainians are like, well, the Russians were slaughtered. And the Russians are going, no. I mean, I just spoke to a guy who's like,
yeah, Slavyanka, which was taken Avdiivka first. And of course, we have our common friend, Marat Khairulin, who kind of disappeared. And it's like, okay, the guy is not on, incommunicado for some reason, I think. And then, of course, he ends up in Avdiivka in the front line unit. And Slavyanka suffered barely anything.
Yeah, and the same thing.
It's like, my gosh, we have like several wounded. That's it. No TIAs. And that's how it all happened. And
so these units that the Russians expected, because look, the Russians are realistic. You launch an attack against a fortified position, you're taking casualties. That's just the way it works, guys. I mean, all these people are showing videos, dead Russian soldiers. What did you expect to happen? They're assaulting a fortified position. And so as they close in, enemy are hunkered down, hidden, they're going to pop up and shoot them. And then you lose guys, you maneuver in, throw your grenades, assault, kill them, and move on to the next objective. I mean, that's just called war. You have a vehicle coming up providing fire support. It hits a mine. It's blown up. The guys inside are dead or wounded. It's war. So everybody's like, oh, the Russians are getting slaughtered. No, they're launching an attack, and an attack against the fortified position generates casualties, except now, because they didn't lose that many guys. I mean, they lost some guys, but these assault units, you can expect to take 30, 40% casualties or more in certain of the leading units. They're taking single-digit percentage, which means they are combat effective, which means that the Russians who plan these things are suddenly looking at two combined arms armies worth of troops that don't have to be significantly replenished, retrained. It said they don't have to be pulled back. They're ready to rock in addition to what they've already done. So the Russians are going to be able to put pressure all over the line at the same time, and the Ukrainians don't have anything to respond with.
There is also the issue of artillery, because and Shoigu was on the plant about 2 weeks ago, which produces Koalitsa. Koalitsa started to arrive in significant quantities. Koalitsa, which is the self-propelled gun. That thing outranges anything out there in the world. There is nothing which touches it. It's the range of the rocket-assisted shells is more than 80 kilometers. It's like insane. So, and it started to arrive now into, actually it was there in the SMO from the get-go, but it was basically in the trial mode. They were kind of tweaking it.
Yeah.
And then suddenly half a year ago, it started to go into the serial production. And obviously they ramped it up, and Shoigu needed it even more. And then it suddenly started to have this operational effect, not just tactical, and in terms of counter battery. And there are other things. Russians were using actually part of the counter battery fight or tactics starting from the, I would say, 2023 at the very beginning, they managed to use the Tornado MLRS, which is horrifying weapon. And it's obviously has a range. I mean, and it has like 90-kilometer range. It's more. It has some rockets which fly even longer than that. They're just kind of sort of like HIMARS. But they use obviously which was perfected, which is recon strike and recon fire complex. And then, of course, they've been using the Tornado, but that's a horrifying thing. When it flies in, you don't even need to have a good accuracy, although it's still very accurate. This thing, I believe the single Tornado, which is 8 tubes, I believe Scott tube, I don't remember, I believe it's 8. It's pretty much, when they fly in, it's 2 football field. There's nothing left there, 2 football field area, it's just gone. Nothing survives there at thermobaric, and so. But now, yeah, they run out of everything, and yeah, that's Scott perfectly described the situation. There is nothing much more to add here, really, So it's.
Yeah, I talked with somebody today, and I tried to liken it to because I think you mentioned it, Andre, Operation Bagration, the destruction of Army Group Center, and the thing though that people don't realize usually is that the Russians lost a lot of guys in Operation Bagration. Yes, it was a decisive victory, but big arrow warfare produces big casualties. And the Russians aren't in the business of losing a lot of people anymore. That's just not their model. So I think a lot of people who are expecting now that the Ukrainians are on their back feet and are only going to get weaker, they're like, well, now's the time to, big arrow it. And I think what you're going to see is the Russians are going to be like, no, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to pick another sector of the battlefield and we're going to dominate it. We're going to take it. We're going to inflict maximum casualties on the Ukrainians, minimum casualties for us. Then we're going to take a pause and go. And when I say a pause, I'm talking like a day, and go over here. And then they move over here. And I just think you're going to start seeing this gradual chunking away at the battlefield, as opposed to, big battles of encirclement and things of that nature, because it's also the most effective demilitarization that there is. You're just chewing up the Ukrainians. They don't have anything to replace these troops. And eventually, the Russians aren't going to need to do big arrow because there's just not going to be anything there. There's going to come a day, and look, I can talk about it now because he actually did an interview. But when I was in Russia this last time, I spent a lot of time with Apti Aludanov, the Chechen. But he's not just a Chechen commander, but he was the commander of, I think it was the 2nd Army Corps in Lugansk. In addition to the Akhmet forces, he commanded Lugansk forces, some Russian forces under his command. He was taken out of the battle zone and sent to the Russian General Staff Academy because he's a pretty knowledgeable guy, and they want to give him more training because they're expecting bigger and better things from him, and also because he's going to try and capture the battlefield experience together with other generals into updated doctrine. But when I talked to him, and we had lengthy conversations, he basically said, look, this military math thing that you've been talking about, he says, you're 100% correct. Yay, I was correct. Opti thought I was correct. I like that. But he said the thing is that you're going to see just the basic mathematical reality of it is that you're going to see on its own volition the battlefield produce dramatic results by May, meaning that it's not like the Russians are going to be saying we have to do this. It's just the reality of the battlefield, the inability of the Ukrainians to maintain cohesion is going to compel. Look, they're already in the strategic withdrawal phase. There's going to be more strategic withdrawals as the Russians overwhelm this. You're going to see they're going to give up, Kramatorsk. That's probably something that's going to fall soon. Izium, Kharkov. The Ukrainians are going to have to make a mad dash back to the Dnieper River and try and form some line there. Then the Russians are going to come down Mykolaiv. Not because the Russians are doing big arrows there, because the Ukrainians can't hold a front, and they have to fall back. And you're going to see Odessa get bypassed. You're going to see the Russians bypass Odessa, link up with Transnistria, and then Odessa will surrender. And this is probably going to happen. Some of this is going to happen by May. But according to Opti, and he just said it today, so I can say it, because I was not telling anybody about our conversation just out of respect for him, because I didn't want to get the guy in trouble. But today he said exactly what he told me. He said by September this all could be over, not because the Russians are doing Big Arrow, but just the Ukrainians won't have anything left. There's nothing left to fight with.
They will run out of it. Yeah. They it sounds cynical, but that's the way of war. You compel the enemy to do our will. And again, we have to keep in mind, Russians don't view it just merely as the war with Ukraine. It became last year the war against the combined West. It's not anymore like, we fight Ukraine. No, we fight NATO. And Putin today and Shoigu, it's like they are obviously simultaneous and unanimous in their assessment, including Rudskoy. This is the big guy. I mean, as much as Gerasimov is important, of course, as the chief of the general staff, but Colonel General Rudskoy, the big honcho, the chief of the main operational directorate, this is the brain of the army. This is what, makes those gears, rotate. And it's NATO. It's against NATO. He talks about all those people. Everybody knows now. All Patriot, all HIMARS, all other crews are American. It goes without saying. British are just also in bulk there, and of course Poles. My gosh, I don't want to go there. There are a bunch of them, including they caught some in Avdiivka. Some of them, of course, just corpses. Others have been wounded. They will be obviously treated properly. All the pure law, for the pure wars of law, because they are not necessarily regulars of the Ukrainian army. They could be executed, without any consequences. But Russians are not gonna do it. Of course, they probably gonna exchange them. Who knows? Who knows what kind of the, so to speak, exchange could be arranged. But yes, it's for now, for majority of Russians, you talk to anybody, and like, yeah, it's us against them, It's not about Ukraine anymore. It's about, how the West will be pushed back to, I don't know, 97 lines. I don't think so. Russians want to really do it right now in the most forceful way. But as Scott correctly stated, in the end, when you look at this, the dynamics of the resources expenditure. You can calculate actually what's going to happen. And that is why you do not need all those big arrows. The state of the front. And I mean, come on, Russians were the guys who introduced this whole science of COFM, correlation of forces and means, because this is actually, you read the Pentagon documents, guess what? It's all references to Soviet and Russian military science, how we calculate the COFM, and people, even in the US Army War College, they wrote a bunch of the dissertations specifically on this topic. So, and yeah, you calculate COFM, you understand the dynamics, you understand approximately when it reaches its peak, when it begins to, precipitously decline. And that's how you plan your strategy, so to speak, how you plan your operations. And Scott, absolutely correct. Why do you need to run with the big arrows when they still have some reserves? And what many people still do not understand, once you surround something, once you envelop something, you have to have two lines of defense immediately. You have the line inside the cauldron, and you have to have the line of the outside, which you have to maintain in order to actually repel possible counterstrike, which is, relief strike for the enveloped force. And in this particular case, why to do this when they are coming in pretty much on their own volition and being annihilated with indeed very, very insignificant losses for Russian side. And that's the result of all. And Avdiivka demonstrated it again. When Marat Khairulin comes out and says, Guys, do you know how many people we lost? 0. I mean, but they were wounded, but there were 0 killed, you know? So that's some achievement.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.